Welcome to Scream Quest, a limited run series brought to you by Screen Quest for the month of October, where we will be diving into the world of horror films through a series of guest and fan-voted selections. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Waterman, joined as always by May Finch.
Hello, hello.
And Will Rotondi, rocking a costume for the first episode. I love it.
Hey, how's it going?
If you're not watching on YouTube, you are really missing out.
But yes, if you're not watching on YouTube, you are indeed missing out. We do all kinds of little fun things like visually, and you get to see our lovely, faces and body language and expressions and all the fun stuff that comes with a video podcast. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing two films for our creature feature. The first of which is Mad God, which is a Phil Tippett created, written, directed stop motion animation film. And the second of which is An American Werewolf in London, the 1981 John Landis werewolf creature feature. So unfortunately, our guest David could not make it, kind of a last minute schedule conflict. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about his film regardless. David, we hope to have you on the podcast sometime soon. So ordinarily we would have a fourth chair here, just not this episode. But don't worry, there are plenty of guests down the road. So without further ado, let's jump into Mad God, which I wouldn't categorize as a creature feature per se. There are lots of creatures in it, but also I don't know how you would peg this fucking movie within like the horror genre. So you might as well call it a creature feature, I suppose. But we'll start with general impressions, and then I just figure like we can let the conversation meander wherever it goes for this. So
yeah, did we
go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Were we going to do a side quest or
we're gonna do that between the movies. We're gonna
Okay.
chop it up a little different for Scream Quest. I think what we'll do probably each episode is discuss a movie, draw a side quest to break it up, and then discuss another movie. And of course, ordinarily, if we had a guest host, we would spend some time getting to know them up front. But yeah, no side quest at the top. We'll be kind of doing things just a little different.
Cool. I totally knew that and was just asking for the benefit of the audience.
So good. Hey, like now they know too. So like no harm done at all.
But yeah, Mad God. Yeah, I think I messaged y'all like multiple times about the fact that I have no idea what to say about this movie. And it's not like a bad I don't know what to say. It's I am very impressed and had a visceral reaction to so many parts of this movie. And yet I could not tell you what it was about kind of reaction. I will say, just like with regards to the stop motion, I've never seen it like I guess used in this way and so creatively. And I respect the hell out of all of the technical skill and effort that went into making this. I think I saw like somewhere that it was made over the span of like 30 years, just because it's been this guy's kind of pet project, and that's really cool. The effort just like does definitely show, but it's not what I was expecting for sure.
Yeah, I so far so good. I think I I agree with all those sentiments. Absolutely. Will, what did you make of it? Give me your just like initial gut reaction to the movie.
There was a lot of shit. No, it was, and not in like not also not saying the movie's a shit show, but it was like a literal shit show. There was so much like feces and just other just gooiness. I think May even made a comment about that too. Just had never seen stop motion that was as gooey as what we saw here, which isn't necessarily a criticism, because that seems exactly what it's going for. It's going for stuff that is disturbing and grotesque and some very strange version of hell that I hope we never have to experience. But to just the set design and the actual like mechanics of it, I thought were fascinating. Even though for me, this is definitely not like a film that I would probably normally have like gone for if I take that back. It's a 50-50 because I thought it looked fascinating from like the preview that I had seen leading up to before we watched this. But having actually seen it now, I'm like, I don't know if this would be like a second run for me kind of thing. And that's just personal preference. That's not necessarily anything negative to say about the film, because everybody's got a different take on horror, like any other genre. And for me, I just thought it was really cool, just the stop motion and the set design. I did think it was interesting, and we could probably talk about it within this, how there are actual like real people that do show up for about 3 or 4 different scenes in the film. I thought that was an interesting choice to make it that way. I kind of almost expected like the entire movie to be stop motion, and so that was a bit, I don't know, necessarily strange. It more so probably just with a reason behind it. So based on how we want to interpret that, since pretty much the entire film is open to interpretation, since there's like 0 dialogue except for maybe like one part over a radio that you hear at the end. So, but yeah, so I guess long of the short of it was that was a lot of goo.
A lot of goo. Yeah, you put that on like the Blu-ray release or something, you know. There's a lot of goo. Screen Quest. Oh man. Yeah, I had to do a double take for some of those like real people, and like I think I rewound the first one where I was like, is that just like really good stuff? No, okay, that's a real person. Just because it was a little bit jarring. I pondered a little bit about like what the reasoning behind that, because like stuff like that's not really accidental, so I couldn't land on if it was like some sort of technical limitation, which doesn't seem likely, or if there was like some symbolic reason behind it, maybe highlighting like specific characters for reasons, but I couldn't quite suss it out in, you know, my reflection of like what it all really meant.
I do have one thought on that. I don't have many thoughts on this movie, but I do feel like it does kind of blur the lines of reality a little bit, because the thing opens with this Tower of Babel imagery and the quote from, I guess, Leviticus about basically a wrathful God, right? And for me, it's kind of like the film is a thought experiment, but then bringing actual people into it is kind of like, but is it so far removed from our current reality? Like asking that question a bit. That was my thought. Anyway, continue, Chris.
No, that's okay. I think that's as valid. Like, I think a lot of what we're gonna probably land on this, like not to jump the gun too much, is that like pretty much any interpretation of this is probably going to be valid as any other, because it doesn't really explicitly lay much out for you, right? And I'll kind of connect that to like what my impressions were, which I really enjoyed the experience of this movie. I like that it kind of demanded your attention. Like, it's not something like where you could peek down at your phone, you know, because there's just a lot going on visually, and it's hard enough. Like, there's no traditional narrative, right? There's very little dialogue, as you've pointed out already, and I think like you could easily get more confused if you're not paying full attention, and I totally respect it for that. I thought overall I loved it. Like, I think the animation was gorgeous. For those of you in our audience who don't know who Phil Tippett is, like, he did a lot of the special effects for the Star Wars trilogy, the original, so Return of the Jedi, I think like the Rancor, the AT-ATs and things like that. He is a master of his craft. He was originally going to do stop motion dinosaurs for Jurassic Park, and famously the line that ended up in Jurassic Park, you know, we're out of a job, don't you mean extinct? Like, that whole exchange was a real thing that happened when he saw the CGI dinosaurs, and was like, oh fuck, like the world in film, I'm watching it change before my very eyes, right? But in any event, like I love that this thing exists, that he got to complete the passion project. I would describe this as more of an experience than like a traditional film. I think that's the best way I could lay it out for somebody that hasn't seen it. Marianne was super impressed, man. She was like just enthralled the entire time. She just loved the artistry of it. And I was surprised by that. Like after like the first 20 minutes, I was like, uh-oh, like I have a feeling Marianne's gonna go off in search of some gardening chores or something like to get away from this. And she's over here saying, yeah, she loved it. She's from the other room.
Nice.
So that was I think like a pretty good endorsement for somebody who maybe doesn't gravitate towards like sci-fi-ish stuff, and I think this has elements of that. But yeah, I guess that's my general impressions and kind of where we were at with it. I don't know how frequently, if ever, I would rewatch this, but I would go back and rewatch like segments of this, because I think there was some parts that were genuinely just really impressive and beautiful or terrible, kind of in equal measure depending on where on this Odyssey you landed into. But yeah, so I guess probably the most obvious question this movie begs is like, what the fuck's happening? How do you interpret this, right? Like, what do you guys think? I'm gonna give that face, Will.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys can't see my face.
I guess the comments come up both in like what I've been reading and also within our group outside of like off screening, that it is kind of like a Dante's Inferno in some respects. You know, you've got a guy who's trying to find his way through hell to essentially to carry out a mission, which for the sake of this film, we find out is to place a bomb, I guess, to blow everything up. And he learns that he's not the only one, or I guess he already knew that. You learn later that there's more of him that look like this little dude over, whoa, sorry if I can point correctly, this little dude over here on the screen with his gas mask on, very nondescript. You know, you don't really get to know him because he doesn't speak and you don't really see his face. And I think they only refer to him as the assassin in the credits. And so he's just working his way through these various stages, going deeper and deeper into this hellish landscape, and eventually tries to complete his mission of setting off the bomb that's in his briefcase, where others that came before him had failed. And come to find out that doesn't work. His bomb catches, the timer doesn't complete, and it's just it's like stuck ticking back and forth with that last second remaining. And I think what really threw me for a loop was when he's later like taken to this this laboratory, and his body is just dismembered, or like his guts are all ripped up. But it's not, at first it's like really disturbing, and then you're like, why is it that his body is so full of all these random things like coins?
It was like a couch cushion.
Yeah,
like they were pulling out change and all kinds of debris,
jewelry. Yeah, it was so wild. And then that weird little like knockoff David Lynch's like Eraserhead weird little baby thing, creature worm thing that came out of him, that I'm like, that is that is something else, man. So yeah, it's strange. It's like he's on this mission from this man to try and blow up this whole world, and I guess essentially start everything over again. But that's the most that I could glean out of that.
Which
I don't know, how about for you
because
guys?
in failing in that mission, like that seems to be what like I interpreted, like kind of like what happens at the end. To jump ahead a little bit, like it seems like when they squish the baby into like baby jelly and then like turn it into like baby ore and turn the baby ore into a baby ingot and throw it in the blast furnace, like that's kind of what happens. Like it was very 2001, like Big Bang. Like there was even like obelisk looking things, like felt like DiCaprio, you know, in the thing, pointing at my TV. So it seems like that's what almost like what the presumably the opposition does with like the baby he's carrying anyway, which is interesting. So do you guys think that these were like warring factions, or like what's the deal with like the surface world and below? It opens with gunfire and like artillery shells and stuff like that, so it certainly kind of has that vibe like at first.
It's true. Yeah, artillery that cannot aim for anything to hit that guy coming down in his little
straight
pod.
down.
Yeah. especially for like the laser sighted stuff too. Like all the guns go up immediately. They're like, oh, something's coming, and then yeah, you can't. They're like stormtroopers. They can't hit anything. So that is interesting though. So yeah, so if they're warring factions and the guy up top, I guess whoever designs the bombs, do you think it's intentional that they go down there and he's not able to complete his task? Or I mean, there's a lot of guys up there, so it's like he's planning for a really long, maybe a long game there. But
Seems to be a war of attrition for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the motives are unclear. Like, is he just trying to end it all, like once and for all? Like let's end everybody's suffering by blowing it up. I haven't the slightest idea. I was really like trying to rack my brain of like what motive could I squeeze out or tease out from what limited exposure we have to that scientist, and I was like, I don't know.
I was gonna say, I kind of like lean into the idea of I do think that this is kind of a multiple sides scenario, but I don't think they necessarily really understand what the other is doing, and I think that often happens in war too, because clearly the last man has his agenda with sending down all these assassins and bombs that don't work, and he just kind of has to keep doing this thing. And then when they zoom out on the hospital where they're operating on the assassin, you see that they've done this with a bunch of them. So it seems like they're searching and searching and searching until they do find like the faux baby finally. Right? That's what they take and use to start the new world. So I think it's quite possible neither side really knows what they're doing. They just know this is my strategy and I'm going to keep at it until something gives, something happens. Going back to what you said about Dante and Inferno, I found the detail about the map disintegrating very interesting. As well as the fact that you see later that was like sewn by these two very like Fates-like looking witch type characters. Because if you think about Greek mythology and the role of the Fates and people get sent on quests, it's often for selfish reasons. The hero doesn't always know all that's going on, and the gods themselves tend to be very selfish and wrathful. And I think this also plays into the whole mad god title as well, right? And I think the fact that the map disintegrates is also just a reflection on the fact that this side doesn't seem to care too much about the assassin and necessarily even how successful the whole journey is. At least when Dante went down into the Inferno, he had Virgil with him. There's no poets in this world.
He sparked something. Oh, I kind of like the idea, like you just kind of sparked an idea in my head that like really like it, if we're to interpret like that, like at the end, like there is like a new universe that's born out of all this, that's maybe like a little bit hopeful potentially, although I think like one of the last images is like a black hole, which isn't great for an image inspiring hope. It is kind of interesting to think that maybe like whether they realize it or not, like cooperation or resources from both worlds, or maybe the knowledge from like one of those worlds and like the baby from the other, is what it really takes to like birth like this new world. Because you have the scientists below that are taking like the grub baby or whatever that was, like from the world above, and that's how they're able to finally kind of combine forces, like through non-traditional cooperation, I guess, and birth out a new world. But I think that's kind of a cool interpretation, is that like had they worked together, perhaps things would have gone a little smoother and be a little nicer. Yeah, it's
I also have an entirely opposite interpretation because this thing is so open to interpretation.
Go for it, please. Like I said,
and that's that this was in fact the bad ending, that you see the assassin descending through kind of like multiple very different planes, like lower and lower and lower, and like he has a pretty big suitcase full of dynamite, but that's not going to destroy the world. I think at most that would destroy the plane that he's on with all of those scientists and doctors. So it could be seen as the scientists and doctors are planning to end the world, and so the assassin is going down to destroy them, essentially.
Yeah.
And then doesn't.
I like that too. Like I said, your guess is as good as mine, really, truthfully. But that's kind
This
of
movie
cool.
is whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, pretty much. Which is, I think, a plus, honestly. Like for me anyway. Like I think that's in the the pros column. Like if I'm doing like a pros and cons to tell, this is how I feel about the movie. I think being open to interpretation makes it a little more interesting. Certainly makes it a little easier to talk about once you get rolling, as we're seeing already. I think. Since it is a creature feature episode, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the creature design. Did you guys, either of you, have like a favorite? And again, I know like using words like favorite and enjoy is like feels weird in the horror genre, but is there one that particularly struck you?
I feel like the one that grabs the assassin I was just mostly just trying to visually like look at all of it, because there is so much of it, and honestly, if you ask me what it looked like now, I couldn't tell you. Because it's just this strange mass of all these different parts that sneak up on him very quietly and just pull him off and to go to to go be experimented on. And I don't know, I just found that to be, I don't know. I think I probably, if we're talking about enjoyment for the sake of like the perspective in the film, I feel like I liked that because it was much more of the, you see a lot of sort of visually disturbing things up front, whereas this one was much more hidden in the shadows and snuck up on him, came up from behind, and he didn't even didn't even hear it. And so I think that's probably what I appreciated about that creature, for whatever its purpose was beyond that.
It was very
Hard to say.
spider-like, but also reptilian.
Yeah.
I also
very
can't picture
long.
it fully.
Yeah, it's hard. A lot of that stuff. A lot of blobby slime ridden things.
Goo.
Do you have a favorite one, May?
And it's not a. I mean, I guess you could characterize them as monsters based less on their behavior and more just on their quality. But the hairball people,
Yeah.
who are, yeah, that it was interesting because despite them being stick figures and having like the least detail of probably any figure, they also behave the most human of any of the creatures down there. And so like even though they're comically simple and like made of like hairballs and feces or whatever, like it was genuinely a little sad when you'd see them get hit by an obelisk or something like that. And of course the monsters on those level I think was probably actually no, I can't say there is a most viscerally grotesque monster, because I'd have at least
Competition's
four.
pretty I was gonna say stiff for that.
Four tied for first place. But yeah, those are pretty gross. And I think the only ones that you see the assassin like really, really afraid of. I also like that kind of plane because you see the assassin like show some kind of sympathy for the like stick hairball people as well, even though he knows he has a different mission to accomplish.
Yeah, OSHA would have a field day in that place, man. Like most of them don't really react. Like they seem kind of oblivious, but my favorite is the guy that's like, "Oi!" to the train that's like,
yeah,
like coming out of him and just gets obliterated. Like he seems really put out. Like, yo, like, oh. Yeah, I think for me, like the towards the very end and like the terrarium with like all the neon, like fluorescent, like it's not really neon's the right word, but like kind of fluorescent, like bioluminescent, like spider insect, like that whole thing was probably like I liked the design there because it was a very stark contrast from the color palette of most of the rest of the movie. So it's like, oh, this is pretty. And then of course something terrible happens immediately. They're having a little picnic and the dude lets out the spider and it comes and snatches, and it's like, oh, come on, can we have a nice moment here? There's been so much goo and slime and death and squishing and squashing and ripping out of stuff. I just want to see somebody have a little picnic at the end. But
yeah,
but I did like that design. I thought it was really cool, pretty.
I also
cool.
And I don't know if you'd call them a monster, but the figure with like the fancy hat and the
plague mask.
yeah,
Yeah. That was like
Just
a
like the way they
Bloodborne Dark Souls
moved.
boss. Like,
Yeah,
was-
the way they moved was so elegant compared to every other creature there. It was interesting.
Mhm.
they almost floated, like you'd see like all these wispy like bits of their costume or cloak or whatever it is, like kind of floating and flowing out from them. I love that.
Mhm.
I also thought it was interesting that they like I mean I have a broader question here too, but I thought it was interesting that there were like little adornments on their hat as well, because you don't see much like intention put towards beauty in any of these spaces. It was like
That's
one of the
true.
few times I saw color or like specific decoration of anything.
Yeah. So do we think that sets them apart from like in terms of rank or something like that, or importance? Or I
Seemed
kind of
like
got
it.
the sense like that,
Mhm.
they're behind this big door. They're receiving like almost what's like a sacrificial grub baby from one of the few human characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely sets them apart. I'm not sure exactly how and if you can be like, understand it to be a positive thing or not. Because I think in a world like this, something that seems beautiful or spiritual is innately attractive, even if it is bent on your destruction, right?
Mhm.
But it does make them eye-catching.
Well, does anybody have anything you want to add before we move on to An American Werewolf in London? Well, side quest in An American Werewolf in London.
I think more just a general question. So the last man, the one of the few characters who is actually a human, or played by a person in the film rather than stop motion, is excuse me, is I know that was kind of weird for a second there. Is I don't know. I always wonder about why when you get characters like that who like they grow their fingernails out very long, or like his toenails.
Yeah.
Like for me, I thought, yeah, okay, you're the only guy here, so you probably don't care. But that does not seem comfortable. I don't know. It always makes me think of like the Guinness Book of World Records when you see like the people with the longest fingernails ever, and how long it must take to get them that way. And then also why you would do that. Like, how can you do much with your hands at that point, or do you just have your assassin guys, do your do your work
It
for
doesn't
you?
seem like a world that would everything is really grimy and like I don't know, dangerous. It doesn't seem like those nails would remain unbroken. That's just me, unless they're made of sterner stuff than the keratin that our fingernails are. But it
I
seems
was
like
gonna
you'd
say
break
it
them.
doesn't seem like there's much in the way of like vitamins and nutrients in this world, and like you gotta have a pretty well-rounded diet to grow out nails like that. So unrealistic perhaps, but I'm glad you brought that up, Will, because I think it does kind of set him up as a foil to the like Crow Mask character that you see, because they're
That's true.
the two
Yeah.
characters that kind of like put intention into the way they appear in a way that isn't solely utilitarian, right? I I will also say, as someone who occasionally wears acrylics, it is not as hard as you'd think to do stuff in them.
Really?
Okay.
Okay.
Nice.
You
Duly noted.
adapt.
Well, people in
Nice.
this insane world seem to be good at that, at least for as gritty and slimy as it is. I won't say that they seem to be doing all right, but they manage, nothing,
Right.
Mm,
whatever their goals are. It seems like they're working towards them, I guess. But, well,
unless you're a
very
little
nice.
hairball that gets burned up in the incinerator because you leaned over too far.
Yeah, it's gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet. You know what I mean?
Ooh, there are a lot of those that got broken.
Also seems to be a lot of poop up above generating them. So
Yeah, for real. Like a continuous stream in that one room where all the dudes are set up and being electrocuted. And yeah. Ooh. Anyway, on that
so
lovely note.
here's the $1,000,000 question before we move on. Would you recommend this movie to somebody? Like I would. I think I would definitely. There'd be a little caveat probably
Yeah.
of, hey, it is completely devoid of dialogue and it is more of a mood. It's a tone piece. It's a very long tone piece, but if you like stop motion animation, I would tell somebody like give it a go. Absolutely. But how about y'all?
Could we also quote you on the side of the cover as saying it's a mood screen quest?
Yeah, it's a vibe.
I would recommend it only to someone I knew very well who I knew would fuck with this, basically.
Nice.
Otherwise, I'll sing its technical praises to anyone, but yeah, gotta be the right kind of person to enjoy this, I think.
Yeah. I would never tell my mom, for example, to watch this, even though I know she likes horror and like what she likes certain things. Like my mom would, I can tell you right now, would hate this like with a fiery passion.
Yep.
I hope my mom isn't even listening to this episode.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was debating. No, I think sort of the consensus with you guys is that there would be caveats. It would be going into it just knowing what to expect, kind of like not to the same extent, but I will say like 2001, since we've already sort of compared a little bit there, because that is also another example of a film that we've talked about in this, in our series, that is atmospheric in a lot of ways. There's a little bit more understanding, I feel like, of plot in that film, but the idea that you go into it where you're not going to know everything that's going on, you have to interpret a lot and make up your own decision about what's happening. And also the caveat of, if you are not averse to seeing a lot of shit depicted on screen through stop motion, then yeah, sure, give it a go. tell me your thoughts.
General goos and slimes and viscera. Yeah.
Torture and blood and guts. So
cool. Well, very nice. Let's have a brief little interlude and draw. We've made brand new side quests for Scream Quest. These are all going to be one-offs. So once it's drawn, it's out of the pile. So there'll be no repeats. And I think we have one more card than we have episode planned. So it'll be exciting to see what our last one is. So our first card is First Blood. And just to remind my co-host and to let the audience know, the prompt for this one is the following: talk about the first film that truly terrified you, even if it wasn't necessarily a horror movie. So there is your first prompt. We can just go quickly like around the table and talk a little bit about that.
Nice.
Remember, we can compare this down if we need to.
I was gonna say, I've already talked about Jaws and E.T., so no. Truthfully, it probably was I saw a clip of Poltergeist when I was a kid, and I think it was when because there's like a scene in Poltergeist where like tendrils come out of a TV or something. Is that right? Am I thinking of the right film? Because I've never actually seen Poltergeist.
Oh, really?
Like the whole way through.
There's definitely a TV involved. I don't know about tendrils out. I mean, there's like ghostly tendrils, like kind of like wispy stuff at one bit.
Like
And there's
tries
some other
to grab the kid and pull him in or something, or
that's more.
Maybe I think about something else.
There's a scene involving like a toy clown in a closet and some other stuff that happens in a bedroom. There's some grabby pulling kids in and stuff like that. In a tree, there's a tree that if you've never seen Poltergeist, full stop before we go any further. Great pick yep. For a Halloween like movie. It's I think technically PG, but I think this was like pre PG-13, so it's very intense. It's a movie you watch and you're like, fucking hell, like they rated this PG. It's like, well, there was no PG-13, but it's Toby Hooper of Texas Chainsaw Massacre fame, and it is incredible. That movie holds up so well. Famously, like kind of sort of ghost directed by Steven Spielberg, which a lot of people have said is not really fair. Like he was giving a lot of notes, but it has that kind of like classic Spielbergian like family kind of thing, with a heaping dollop of terror. So anyway, continue. So tell me the story. You saw it on TV, like a bit of it, and you were like, nope.
I think it was late at night, it was on TV, and maybe this is not the film then, because there was something about like there was a TV that was on in like a dark room, and there were these tendrils that were coming out, or something was coming out trying to grab this kid and pull him in, and something about that just really scared me.
Oh
I don't
God.
know how young I was, but it was just the thought of like something that would come out of, I don't know, out of our television or just in general at night from somewhere and pull me into the ether. And so yeah, that was pretty much it. The
There
Dark
were
was
two
a very
sequels, to be fair.
terrifying
It could have
thing.
been one of those. Like I haven't
Oh,
seen
nice.
them,
Okay.
so maybe it was one of the sequels. Yeah. That's a great
Nice.
pick though, regardless. And I can see why that would be scary. Something very familiar doing something scary is it's always a good starting place.
Yeah.
How about you, May?
Um, my genuine answer is also I have no idea what movie it is. It was like at a friend's sleepover. Her older sister was also like having a sleepover and watching movies, and their door was open. I passed by, and there was just like this really grotesque, like contorted woman's face screaming, and I just noped out of there. But I have no idea what movie that was. So the other answer is The Little Toaster.
Oh,
Brave Little Toaster.
oh,
Yeah.
the little toaster is
Oh man.
awesome. Yeah.
That was scary. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Like
Mhm.
I I was like thinking recently that I was just being fragile and sensitive when I got freaked out by that, and I went to like go watch it again, and I was like, oh no, this has like existential terror in it. Like
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no
It's
joke.
like kind of a like a precursor to Toy Story in a lot of way. Like it's darker, I think, than Toy Story.
it's
But yeah.
way darker. I could never look at my toaster the same way.
Aw.
What I need to do or need you to do, May, and
Oh
I'm
no.
definitely going to insert a photo of this regardless. Go into your web browser right now,
Okay.
and I want you to Google image search the following: Zelda, like the video game character, Pet
Uh-oh.
Cemetery, and cemetery is with an
Boy.
S. And tell me if that is
Is
the
this
contorted.
gonna mess up my search history?
I don't think so. I mean, it's just a very well known part of Pet Cemetery that fucked a lot of people up.
It
So
might be.
yeah. Okay, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I
put a
think that's
little.
it.
Yeah, that's a lot of people were completely. So the character I think has spinal meningitis, and it like there's a sequence in Pet Cemetery where I think it's the wife or the mom of the family is like remembering like kind of the shame of like being terrified of her own sister because she's all contorted. And any event, okay, well that photo's going in just for anyone who's not been blessed enough to see that. It is a very terrifying part of the movie, so I can see why that would be scary if that is indeed what you kind of saw, through the doorway or whatever.
Well, thank you for solving a lifelong mystery of mine, Chris.
I live but to serve. Yeah, for me, trying to think, like, I got into horror so young, and I will say admittedly my mom and dad, like, they didn't censor me much. They kind of let me watch what they felt like I could handle, and if it seemed like it was a bit much, then they would kind of slide that scale back a little bit. But I probably saw some shit that I shouldn't have seen, like maybe at quite so young. I think The Shining is probably gotta be one of the first, if not the first, though. I think I was like 9 or 10 when I saw that. And yeah, there in particular, I think the twins, like, really, like the bits where he's riding around on the tricycle and the twins pop up. Because mind you, I had no knowledge of like popular culture of this thing at the time, so like all of that, like, right, I had like no frame of reference. They were just like, oh, this movie The Shining is like one of the scariest movies, and I think they forgot there was full frontal nudity, so I had to like cover my eyes for that, like on my parents' insistence. They were also slightly, I think, appalled by how much language there was in it. I don't think they had recalled that, like, because it had been years and years since they had seen that. But also, like, the train was already rolling, and boy, anytime I was walking around the house like at night and nobody else was up, Like I was tiptoeing. I would peer around corners if I was going down a different hallway. Like I did not want to see those twins, So I don't know if that's the example, but that's certainly the one that really sticks out. Probably a bit young for The Shining, but it's okay. It's one of my favorite movies ever now. So
Nice.
Did you ever have a problem with elevators?
Ooh.
no, oddly enough, no elevators or bathtubs really. I was more petrified by the shower scene in Psycho, which was probably not too long after I saw that. Like, never worried about baths, but like I'd be in the shower, like shampooing my hair, like eyes are closed, and then I'd have like, all right, what if what if somebody's gonna come in here and get me? It's always that weird thing that makes no sense, especially when you're younger, for stuff like that. Like we've established, sharks in the deep end of the swimming pool, for example. Yeah.
That's
I
why
love
you
all
always
those
lock
answers.
your bathroom door, though, man. That's why you always lock the bathroom door.
That's right. Absolutely. I agree 100%. Well, thank you as always for sharing, y'all. And that brings us to the second film of our creature feature, which is An American Werewolf in London, 1981. I think we said directed by John Landis. And I'm curious, as always, like initial impressions. If this is your first time, let me know that. And then just what did you think? So start with May again on this.
It's funny because my opinion changed within like an hour of seeing it. Because when it first ended, I was like, oh my God, that was so stereotypical. And I was like, I got that it was intentionally jarring between the the horrific bits and the comedic bits. And I do maintain that I think it was trying to do a little bit too much with like also like having the romantic plot line in there and like all the comedic horror stuff. But I look back on some scenes now, I'm like, yeah, that was pretty camp. Like I think I'd probably enjoy it more watching it again than watching it the first time.
Yes. Go ahead,
I
Will.
liked it. I thought it was entertaining. I liked it. I was surprised that it built up as much as it did until you actually see the protagonist turn into the werewolf. I didn't expect that. And then just how much it just ended so suddenly, very much like Bonnie and Clyde, like, okay, we're done. And so, and especially when it even like the introduction felt much more immersive as you're seeing like the countryside and you're getting introduced to your characters and the credits are going and then suddenly versus like the very end where it's like, okay, no, he's dead. So yeah, no, but overall the sort of the points that have already been talked about, the campiness, the humor, but also then like suddenly like the horror of, okay, somebody just got dismembered or there's blood or the transformation. So but I sort of anticipated that it to some degree that it would be that, just because it felt like it would be a film like horror around that time tended to go for both of those. And so yeah, no, overall though, I really liked it.
Yeah, the first time I saw this was on Comedy Central, I think, which I tweeted out, which is such an odd. I think that's why I was specifically attracted to it, because like I had heard of it in horror circles and probably seen it at the video store, but I was like, why is this on Comedy Central? And this is like the heyday of like South Park and all kinds of variety programming, but like very much like comedy. And even though it was censored for content a little bit, immediately understood, watching. I was like, oh, I totally get this. And then I was surprised at how gory it was when I like rented the videotape and watched it like off of cable television. Was like, oh, okay, this is a little bit bloodier than what's there, but the transformation scene was intact completely, except for maybe like a shot or two of like his butt, like maybe it was like kind of pared down. You know how we are in America, like you can watch somebody get like dismembered and everything else, but like you show an ass or a boob, like no way.
No.
But anyway, but the transformation scene was just so impressive to me, even as somebody who was probably like, I don't know, 12-ish, just the practical effects and how painful, you know, like a lot of times I feel like up to that point when I've seen like werewolf transformations, it was usually like very quick, not very visceral. Sometimes you'd see a little bit in the shadows, and like to see like the hands like stretching out and like the bones popping up on his like back and him screaming, right? Like like just, I mean, he sells the shit out of that, being really uncomfortable, you know, really well, David Naughton, the actor. And that's still the thing. I think a lot of people, when they think of this movie, that's one of the first things that comes to mind, is like that transformation. Just amazing stuff. So I like, it's one of my favorite. I'm unabashedly like just a huge fan of this movie. And if they ever bring it back around, because they've had one repeat already, but this is probably the best Halloween Horror Nights like non-original IP house that they've ever had, specifically because of the attention to detail. Like when you walk into like the house, it is the opening room is the slaughtered lamb, and everything is incredibly faithful and realistic. But they had the original molds still intact for the wolves, and they created like all these unique puppets. I think that took like 6 or 7 people a piece, and they lunge out at you, and everything is moving in a very realistic, like scary ass way. Like, and it comes from unexpected directions, and it was just such an impressive house. If you can find a YouTube video to kind of see like a little bit of what it looks like inside, but they right down to the porn theater, which they kind of blur out, I think, when you're walking through there. Like but yeah, so if they ever bring it back, it's worth going down just to experience that. But I digress. I think one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about is like what sets this apart from like other like werewolf movies. And I think the comedy is certainly one aspect, but I think like the mythology of itself and how a lot of the things unfold. So where I wanted to kind of start is like the dream sequences, which I think are some of the more interesting bits of like the movie as his body's adjusting to what's happening inside. What did you make of some of those? And there's one in particular that really, I think, stands out for a lot of people, and they see like, what the fuck is happening? But did you guys like that? Did it strike a chord with you at all?
I don't know if like is the word I would use.
Did you find it interesting? How about that? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a human response, especially like, I think if something terrible has happened to you, it's going to naturally bring up whatever other fears you've had in your life, or might be kind of like latently in the back of your brain. So it felt like a very human response, but also just very jarring against the rest of the film. And like I don't think they were trying to like make light of like a, you know, Nazi invasion of your home or that kind of thing, but it did feel kind of out of place.
Yeah. So they discussed this specifically on the Shudder 101 scariest movie moments. That dream with, and then like the fake out within the dream was one of the sequences that they picked. Yeah. I think some of like the Nazi like symbolism was probably like, so we're a little closer to World War II at that point, and presumably like his father may have like fought or something like that in World War II. But I think a lot of what it came down to was just like his body's trying to adjust to like what's going on, and it's similar to like when you have like a fever dream when you're sick. I don't know if you've ever been through that. It's wild the kind of stuff your brain will manufacture. I think his brain is like just compounding all the most horrible things he can think of, like into this weird melange of like just grotesque violence. I mean, even like I don't know if you would call them creatures really, but like the design of like are so weird, and as you said, like a little out of place. But I think I chalk that up to maybe like just the surreal way that his brain is trying to process like what his body is going
very
through.
Dreamlike. And I did appreciate the fake out, because that's another thing that I find is more, at least for me, I am more likely to like think I'm awake when I'm not, if I'm like sick and having fever dreams.
Before I forget, did you catch that the American kind of dweeb that is talking to him from the embassy, that is Frank Oz, who's the voice of Yoda and Miss Piggy. It's a nice little cameo. His voice,
I didn't
you
realize.
can hear it. Mr. Kessler, you know, like when he's talking. Because I caught his name in the credits. I'm like, who is? See if I can figure out who it was. And then he talked, and I was like, that's got to be him. Yep. but I think probably the other bit that like really to me like sets this apart from a lot of werewolf movies is the idea of like the undead like victims like in like the limbo state and talking like those bits I really love because it kind of it humanizes what he's going through a little bit, and he's kind of directly confronted with like his actions, you know, even though he doesn't remember what's happened. I thought it was just really interesting, and it's like that concept is just every time I watch it I'm like, this is such a brilliant like creative way to, and again seemingly out of place the first time you watch it, but what an interesting way to have him bounce some of what he's going through off of like somebody, you know. What did you guys think of that?
It's very interesting for me just because of how layered things became for me, at least in that scene. Because first off, shout out to the FX team because the makeup they did on Jack is just stunning.
Yes.
And how it just gets, you know, more and more decayed every time he comes back up. But the first time that you see Jack come on screen and like how he's still being very tongue in cheek and then just suddenly is like, oh, by the way, you also, you know, have to smell yourself. Like it's very jarring. It almost feels like he's saying it as a joke at first. And I think the audience, like David, is incredulous. Like, no, not doing that. And then when you get to the theater scene, it hits you that, well, no, not only was he like being earnest in that moment, there's all these other people that appear and pop up. So like that request and like the weight of that request becomes real. At the same time, you're in this porno theater and it's just ridiculous. And it's like you're laughing at that. You're laughing at the kind of like British sensibility and humor of the victims as they're quipping back and forth. But I think you're also kind of laughing with the sheer horror of finally realizing the gravity of the situation and just how fucked up it is. So yeah, a very layered moment for me and unsettling in a good way, I guess.
Yeah, there's some humility to like Jack, I think, where he's like, do you mind? He's a friend. Like he's like almost kind of telling them like all right, go easy. Like we're not asking him to do something easy. Like he seems to understand, you know, that it's not an easy decision to make, and has empathy, like even from the afterlife, which is, I think, again, like it just it adds a little bit of extra to where those scenes could be. It could just be like a Jacob Marley like haunting him like kill yourself, you know, and instead like there's a lot of humanity, I think, in those scenes. I do, my favorite line of the movie is probably, I didn't mean to call you a meatloaf, Jack, when he's transforming. It always makes me howl. I don't know why.
I was curious why Jack slowly like decays more and more. Like he's already dead, but yet his body is still like, by the end he's very obviously very animatronic, but also very cool and animatronic at the end, in his last form that you see before everything unfolds with the transformation. So anything more to that? I mean, he says that everyone's pretty much trapped in limbo until the surviving werewolf is killed. So why would he still decay?
Maybe that's just like the state of being, and part of what makes it so unpleasant is that like your state of being in limbo is mirroring probably what's happening to your body in like the real world, right? So like the longer it's been since like your demise, the more soupy, the more you would fit in the world of Mad God, I guess.
No,
I think it's just because it's the grossest way to depict it, and that's what they were going for.
Which, yeah, no, definitely the special effects in that movie are great. Like the makeup is amazing. So especially like the time that you see Jack and he's just like got skin just hanging off the side of his neck that just jiggles every time he talks, and I'm like, this is like it's cringy for me just because like when you suspend that disbelief to think about that, but it was spot on. I think it's good in the sense that I'm trying to think about in answer to your question, since I kind of deflected it, how I feel about that, I guess those scenes in particular. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I would really add to what's already been talked about, because I think it is interesting how, you know, you get the evidence because to some degree, I mean, you sort of wonder if maybe you know, maybe David is just going crazy. Up until you, obviously, people are like when he does go around and start murdering people. But you think that maybe, I don't know, he's had some weird dreams. Maybe he would try to suspend disbelief a little bit more. That it's a little bit more ambiguous. But I think for him, his character needed to see, what he did, because he couldn't remember anything that had happened when he transformed. And so to actually have the evidence there and to realize how substantial it was, that yeah, just the effect of that on him for what he knew needed to happen at the end.
Did you have a particular scene that stood out to either of you that was like a favorite, or even like little humorous moments? I'll tell you, like, one of my stupid ones is like, it's very Monty Python-esque, is the one of the detectives like knocks over the tray of like the little surgical like bowls, and he's like a puzzle trying to put them back in the ascending sizes. Like, it's such a fucking British, I don't know, like moment. Like, it's like I said, you could put John Cleese there and you'd be right at home doing that, like just the physical comedy of it. But yeah, do you have any moments that you really liked in the movie that we haven't talked about, I guess?
You guys mentioned that it does a good job of setting the mood, but I love the pub when they first walk in, and
Yeah.
they even see the sign and they're like, this is kind of a weird sign. And I guess it's David who's like, no, it's fine, it'll be great. And they go in, and I just love how committed everyone in the pub is to staring them down, staring them into their souls. And the dialogue with the bar lady is pretty funny.
It's like, no, but I can make you some with the tea. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they do a shitty job of blending in, because if you're trying to like blend in and not be suspicious, like the worst thing you could do is just like get super quiet when everyone walks in and they're immediately suspicious, seeming, I think, in that. But it works. Like, I think there's a nice little atmosphere there. And of course, like, everything like starts to kind of settle down, and then of course Jack's like, hey, what's that on the wall? And it just goes quiet again. You're like, oh my god, why?
It felt so aggressively American abroad who doesn't know what they're doing.
I really like the doctor, because he's
Yes.
so just very straightforward about everything, and he doesn't, like, anything that happens, he's not really fazed by it. Like when he's asking about where David's at, he's asking oh my gosh, what's the
Alex
Nurse
is
Price, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
Alex. When he's asking her at the end about if she has seen David recently, and they've been hooking up like right after he got discharged from the hospital. She's like really hesitant to mention anything. And he just like glosses over it, like it's not a big deal, just like, okay, where's he at? Okay, well, what's the number to your apartment? So we can call and make sure if he's okay over there. That just, I don't know, I just really appreciated how very calm and straightforward he was in everything that happened, with maybe the exception of whoever he was really chapped off about, who kept calling him at the beginning. But no, he was like
passed on or whatever.
Yeah, tell him I'm dead. But he was so, I don't know. It felt very reassuring every time he was there. I'm like, I hope he doesn't die. I feel like he will probably die, but I like his character, and I appreciate that he is here to help, be the calm voice of reason to some extent while he's trying to figure out what's going on and help David. So
he seems like a good doctor. Like, he's curious, like he takes what his patient says seriously and like investigates it, right? Like, there's a lot of qualities I think that are super admirable. Like, even if he doesn't fully buy the werewolf angle, like he doesn't want to let it go, right? He's like, yeah, there's some about this doesn't make sense, and he seems genuinely concerned about David, not just like people that he might harm, but David himself, which is like, I think, kind of endears you to him a little bit, right?
He's obviously way more engaged, like actually in the story here, but just his kind of like tone and demeanor does remind me a little bit of the narrator from Rocky Horror, the kind of like forensic analyst guy.
Yes, I could totally see that.
Nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Probably the only other scene I would mention that I think is like really well acted, because really, like, if you come down to like the technical side of it, he's probably talking to nobody on the phone, but David Naughton with his like last phone call to his sister, I always find really touching and kind of heartbreaking. Again, he's probably not acting to anybody. He's probably just holding up the empty phone and kind of like in that movie way, like letting you know what's being said by maybe being a little more expressive than you normally would be on the phone. But I think that scene really works, and it always kind of breaks my heart a little bit.
Especially like the obviously you don't hear the like sisters dialogue, but it sounds very authentic to how you would try to talk to a small child about something like that.
Yeah.
He's
I
like,
think actually,
no,
I'm
not
glad
at
that you
10 and a
mentioned
half
that,
either.
yeah.
You could
Yeah.
almost hear her going, I'm 10 and a half, as a kid, a precocious kid would do. But sorry, well, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. I was just I wanted to agree with you. I'm glad you guys brought that up because I feel like this is one of those rare horror movies where I feel like the characters are like they feel real. They feel like people you would talk to, that you would actually meet, and you care about their interactions with each other more than just like, okay, well, people are gonna die and whatever. But no, you're actually like you're invested in what's gonna happen. And so I think that makes it even more, I don't know, like I was really surprised that it just ended as suddenly as it ends after all this buildup. And I'm like, oh, what? And so
This would be the
that
tail end of New Hollywood, man. So we talked about those
yeah.
on the Bonnie and Clyde episode. That was the flavor of the day. No denouement. We're just gonna shock you and get your ass out of the theater and think about it out there, on the streets. Yeah, I remember being surprised too. First time I saw that. It's shocking. Again, it's sad, like the sort of final image of him, like transformed back right to, and
And they cut off just as Nurse Price starts crying, and you feel bad at first, and then you remember, she'll find another patient next week.
Yeah, she says it's not like a regular thing, and even Dave's like, I hope so.
Do
I
you
hope not.
believe her? I don't believe her.
I don't know. I mean, that element of it feels very like 1980s, like that, the weird, like overly long sex scene, very 80s.
Oh yeah,
for sure. It's like, yeah, this is the guy that directed Animal House, if you guys didn't know that. And yeah,
nice.
so, but well, let's wind things down by just quickly talking about what we've been watching, even if it's not horror related. I know to the just unplugging my mic by accident. Even for the bulk of our episodes are going to be horror focused. Just curious what you guys have been watching.
Well, I actually have been watching more horror recently, so much so that my Apple Watch thinks I have a heart issue.
That's great.
But yeah, in addition to these two, I watched Crimson Peak for the first time because I love my good old fashioned Gothic literature. And I was told it's kind of a mix of The Fall of the House of Usher and Jane Eyre. And I guess like spoiler alert, but it is like you seamlessly just combined those two. Like it's pretty direct and overall enjoyable, very high production value. It has Tom Hiddleston in it and like great cast. Writing ironically left a little bit to be desired. They did actually use some quotes from I think Jane Eyre, which were great, but the dialogue around it was then kind of like noticeably different. But overall enjoyable. My main qualm is just that the protagonist is herself a horror writer and yet somehow ends up in the exact position that she has definitely read about in all of these Gothic horror novels.
Kind of like Nev Campbell in Scream critiquing how dumb female protagonists are in horror movies and then doing the same exact thing that she just railed against.
It's exactly that, but Gothic tragic romance.
That's Mr. Del Toro, right? Guillermo del Toro. Didn't he direct that?
And it's also extremely Guillermo del Toro.
Okay. I have not seen it, I'll confess. I've always been curious, but I heard it's pretty bloody at times, or am I thinking of something else?
Yeah, it gets a little stabby.
Okay. I might be thinking of something else. There was some movie I know that was like kind of pushed it, but I don't maybe I'm confusing that with
so this isn't a spoiler, but the family estate is built on this ground that has this like red mineral deposit or something that's valuable, and they're trying to figure out how to get it up out of the earth. And it looks like blood during the winter because it wells up and then mixes with the snow. So it looks a lot bloodier than it is because of this mineral ore kind of thing.
Cool.
Very
nice.
gothic.
I'll have to add that to the list. What about you, Will? Anything interesting?
Mostly just catching up on Andor, watching Star Wars. Because one, I loved Rogue One, and so I was excited to see where they wanted to take this. And I've only gone about I made it 3 episodes in. So I think it started out strong. I think it's falling into the trap of getting a little too slow to try and flesh out stuff that you may or may not really need. But I think that's sort of the fine line that so many so many shows for streaming these days sort of try to, you want to try and have something to fill in that story and make it interesting, but not necessarily feel like everything has to be like shooty bang bang all the time. And so I don't know, the jury's still out, but also the season's not done yet, so I don't want to spoil anything, obviously. But yeah, it's entertaining. I'll see it through. Kind of the same way I've felt about the Lord of the Rings. It's interesting enough that I want to see where they want to take it, and I am open to how they want to stick the landing. So we'll see how it goes.
Of the recent Star Wars projects, I probably heard the most praise for Andor. So I'm excited to start it myself.
Yeah.
Big same. And I think my biggest complaint in general with art, like these days, TV, movies, like video games, is like sometimes less is more. Like I do feel like there's like a temptation to like quantity over quality sometimes. I've felt that way about a lot of shows recently where, like, say it's 8 episodes, like 6 would have done better. Like I think it would have been a tighter story with like just as much impact. But as you said, that's kind of a sign of the times a little bit. There's that temptation to like a little overstuffed, right?
Yeah.
But I'm excited to check that out. That sounds cool, man.
Yeah.
I am still continuing with House of the Dragon. I'm still enjoying it. I just got to the time jump episode, but I haven't watched it yet, so I'm like a couple of weeks behind. Marianne and I have been watching What We Do in the Shadows because we had about a season and a half of backlog of that, and it's perfect time of year for that. Of course, just an amazing, funny ass TV show. And not horror themed, but boy, I've gotten so lucky this year. I've discovered 2 great movies that like are instantly like in like my favorites ever. And one was Dog Day Afternoon. The second was Once Upon a Time in the West, which just blew me away. Like I was just gobsmacked by how good it was. I don't know why it took me so long to watch it. I think I tried to start it like a year ago, and like I often do, I was a little too tired. And Sergio Leone is a big fan of lots of very long, drawn out scenes with no dialogues, especially at the beginning of the movie. So you have to like really want it. And then like once it gets rolling, it's an amazing roller coaster. But yeah, I think the opening of Once Upon a Time in the West is like around 12 minutes, and there's like hardly a word spoken in that 12 minutes. But great movie. I think it's, if I had to peg the one that influenced Tarantino the most of his, like that's the one I would pick after watching it. I'm like, yep, I can see where so much of this has popped up in Tarantino's work. So it makes sense that I would like it. Other than that, I've really been like, man, enjoying my Shudder subscription. Like the 101 scariest movie moments of all time has just been a blast. I'm looking forward to starting Queer for Fear at $5 a month. Like I think, man, the value proposition of that service and like how much work they've done to really build a nice like curated collection, especially for October, man, it's been great. So I highly recommend, even if you're just gonna have it for a month or two, like $5, like 2 thumbs up. There's a lot of cool stuff there. And it is
This is
like
not
there's
a sponsored podcast, though.
It is
Like,
not
no
a
one's
sponsor,
paying us
but
to say that.
but Shudder, if you want to open up I will work for food and swag, and I can't speak for my co-host, but I would assume they would probably also work for food and swag. So
And money.
Yeah, money's great. I'm just saying, like, if money's off the table, like food and swag is also cool.
You just put a big Shutter logo over my head for this. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it'd be like Mike Wazowski and
Yeah,
fucking
yeah.
Monsters Inc. Just the Shutter logo over Will's face.
Yeah.
Oh man, well now that's going in for at least like the last 30
Also,
5
seconds.
well,
seconds. Yeah.
I don't know what you're reaching for, but when you're reaching, it looked like you're sticking your finger in his ear in the background.
Oh,
That's
nice. We're just like,
You're really getting in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. On brand, really.
Yep.
So cool. I think that's pretty much gonna do her for this week. Our next week's episode is going to feature a very special guest, Isaac Thorne, horror author. Very
Woo.
excited to have Isaac on, and we will be doing a new category that we've called Ha Ha Ah, which is a horror comedy category, I guess, for lack of a better word. We're going to be analyzing two films that feature both horror and comedy, which I think is just a great combination when done well. So more to
And
come on what those films will be. Oh, go ahead.
But
Sorry.
you have a say in what those films are going to be, right? If you vote
Yes.
on our Twitter
Mhm.
page at ScreenQuest Pod. I think the
Yes.
poll should still be up when this comes out, right?
Yep, it'll still be up. So yeah, that's your opportunity to have a little influence on what we discuss on the show. So Isaac will be bringing a film of his choice. Should I say what his movie is, or should I save it?
Nah,
I
let's
guess
surprise them.
Surprise him.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, we'll announce it on Friday so that you have some time before the episode. You'll have the weekend, we'll say, to be able to watch it. But Isaac has nominated a film, and then you, the listeners, will decide what that other double feature film will be by voting on the Twitter poll, which is really kind of cool. I've enjoyed that we still have a little bit of chaos week to week.
And last I checked, all the options are tied. Although for some reason, one of them gets like a single percentage more, even though the number of votes is the same. I checked. So
That's weird.
someone's cheating. Someone's paying Twitter to get ahead. Not me, but
Not
This
me.
is rigged.
Fantastic. Well, we hope you enjoyed this first of our very special limited run October series. I think this has been fun for me. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it as well. Manuel, just doing
hell
something
yeah.
different. And I like it because it kind of it takes a little bit of the decision factor out of like some of my spooky watching. So good stuff. Well, thanks to all you listeners for tuning in. If you are new to the podcast, please follow us at ScreenQuest Pod on Twitter. Interact with us on social media. We love that kind of stuff. And until next week, we love you. Bye.
Bye, guys.